Hey guys, so the last thing we did, if you remember, is we created a route for getting, or an endpoint for getting Pokemon data for all the Pokemon. And that's definitely really helpful, but we want to add some endpoints that will help us actually do stuff with the data. So let's go ahead, let's get started creating an endpoint that will allow us to catch a Pokemon. So if you want to open Sublime, and let's open, if you go into your routes folder and just open that Pokemon route. And then let's see. So here's that Pokemon route right here. We're gonna actually do something else just to make sure everything's working properly. If you open command prompt, we're going to install another package. Make sure you're in the API subfolder of your project and type npm install body parser -- save. Now, body parser is going to do for us, how we're going to use it is it's going to allow us to parse any JSON data that's coming in the request and also send a JSON response, which we're already doing. We just want to make sure we don't have any errors in our code. So then go back, oh, sorry about that. Go back to your app.js file, and right before where you're importing the routes, type app.use, and this is kind of like in our routes files, it's kind of like app.get. But the way app.use works is every time any endpoint is hit, it's going to run the code that we put in here. So the first thing we'll do is body parser.json. And oh, you know what? This doesn't even exist right now. We need to create a variable called body parser. So we're going to import that at the top. This is what we just installed, body parser. Okay, so back here, app.use body parser.json. So it's going to parse the request body that's coming in. It's going to parse it as JSON. And then we're going to do another one to make sure the response is parsed as JSON. So we're going to do app.use react.res.next. And this is, again, probably looks pretty familiar. We don't have a path here, but we do have a request, a response, and then also this next object. And all the next object is going to do is when we type return next, it'll bump the request to the next step in the process, which might be getting Pokemon data or catching a Pokemon, which is what we're going to do next. So just before that return next, let's do res.set header. So we're setting the header on the response. We're setting the content type of application/JSON. And yes, that'll parse the response as JSON. Okay, so now we're ready to get started creating our new endpoints. But before we do that, we're just going to add something to this Pokemon endpoint. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this straight from the guide on GitHub. And so in this include array, if you remember what we were doing, we were finding all the Pokemon in the database, and we were joining that Pokemon data to the moves table, which incidentally is empty in our case, but theoretically it would have data in it. We're also going to add more data. There's a lot of other tables we can join to. So that's what I'm going to paste here. And if you're on GitHub, you can get this. I mean, you can just look here and copy it, or you can get this on, let me bring it over here. So under step 4, build more routes, under get Pokemon, it's just this block here. That's what you need to copy and paste. So here we have, so we have moved twice, once from before and once from what we copied. So I'm just going to remove the one we did before. So we're joining to the evolution table. The evolution table is then joining again to the Pokemon table, because not only do we need to find the Pokemon that we're evolving from, but we need to find the Pokemon that we're evolving to and bring it into the data. Same goes with devolutions. devolutions isn't really a thing in Pokemon as far as I know. I'm sure there's people who know way more about Pokemon than I do. My knowledge is pretty dated. But basically, this is just going to be useful for us if we're, say, displaying a page with the Pokemon Ivysaur. And Ivysaur evolves from Bulbasaur and evolves into Venusaur. So this devolution will tell us who Ivysaur evolved from. And then locations, just the places where that Pokemon can be found. The moves, again, you already know what that is. Types, each Pokemon has a type, could be fire, water, grass, etc. They could actually have multiple types. So that's what that is. And I think that's all we need to do for that. So if you just want to go ahead, open command prompt and run your app, just node app.js, then go into Postman and hit send on that Pokemon request. And you'll see all that data. And here you'll see we have an evolutions array, a devolutions array, which is empty for Bulbasaur because he doesn't evolve from anybody. He's the first in his chain. We have locations. Bulbasaur is found in Pallet Town and Cerulean City. Moves, which is empty. Types, so he's grass and poison type. So yeah, that's how that works. Just some extra data to add there. All right, now let's go back to Sublime and let's add our catch Pokemon route. So after the Pokemon route, I just collapsed it to make it easier to see. Type app.post. And now we're using a post endpoint because we're actually going to be changing data. We're going to be creating data specifically, inserting data into a database. And that's what post endpoint is usually for. So for this endpoint, we're just going to make the path trainer / trainer ID / catch / Pokemon ID. Okay, so a word about this syntax here. When you put in Express, when you put a colon before something in a path, that's saying that this is actually a variable. So we're not going to type :trainer ID when we run this in Postman. We're going to put an actual trainer's ID in there. So if you go into the trainer table in your database, so for instance, if we wanted to catch something as Gary, we put a 2 in that slot. And then going back, the same thing goes with Pokemon ID. So we're going to put 2 for Gary and 4 for Charmander. So Gary's going to catch Charmander is how that's going to work. And then add your function here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the value of these IDs. So we're going to use deconstructed syntax here, Pokemon ID. We're going to get that from request, so rec.params, and that's going to get us those values. And then the next thing we'll do is we want to see, when you catch a Pokemon, you can give it a nickname, kind of like you give your pets names. You don't just usually call your dog or your cat. You give it a name like Spot or Fido. I don't know. Those are generic names. So that's the idea here. You could totally, in Pokemon, you don't have to give them a name and then you just call them Bulbasaur or Charmander. But you definitely have the option to do that. So we're going to give our users the option to do that. So they can either pass in a nickname in the request body, or that's what those 2 pipes mean. They can pass it in in the query string, and I'll explain what that is in a second. And if they don't do either of those, it's just going to be null, and we'll just use the default Pokemon's name. So in the body is, let's just go ahead and create a new tab and start this request. So it's a post. I'm going to do http://localhost port 3000. And we're going to do trainer :trainer ID catch and :Pokemon ID. And then if you look here, as you were typing in the things after colons, they filled in the path variable. So we could put, Gary is trainer 2 and he's going to catch Charmander, which is Pokemon 4. And so the query, you'll see query params right here. You can type them in here. So say we want to give Charmander a nickname of Charmy. And as you're typing there, it fills up here. So what happens is anything after this question mark in the URL needs to follow this format where you'll have a variable name followed by an equal sign and the value. And so that's how they could pass that nickname through the query string. But the default is going to be through the request body. So the request body, if you go over to body, we want this to be JSON. So in this drop-down menu, click raw, and then in this one, do JSON. Just start typing some JSON. We'll do a nickname, and we'll do Charmy. Now, you know what, let's do a different one. Let's do Firetail or something like that. I don't know. In this case, where we have a nickname set in the body and the query string, it's going to choose the one in the body. So it's going to name our Charmander Firetail. But that's just how we have it set up. Generally, you know, they're only going to be passing it in through one way, and we're giving them two options. Let's just do the body, and I like the name Charmy better than Firetail. Okay, but we're not ready to run this yet, so let's just save this for when we're done. The next step in the process is we need to use this trainer ID and this Pokemon ID and get those records from the database. So we're going to do kind of like what we did with the Pokemon thing up above. Models.trainer. So from the trainer table, we're not going to do find all because we only need one. We're going to do find by primary key, which primary key is the ID in the table, the ID column. So we're going to pass in trainer ID. And I'm also going to do, just duplicate this. Pokemon, in case you're wondering, in Sublime on Windows at least, to duplicate a line, you do Control-Shift-D. I find it useful. So we're just going to find the Pokemon. Now it's possible that the client, the user passed us a trainer ID or a Pokemon ID that don't actually exist in our database. For instance, in our trainer database or trainer table, we only have 4 trainers. So what happens if they pass us an ID of 7? Well, this isn't going to find anything. So the trainer is going to be null. Same goes with Pokemon. If they pass us an ID for a Pokemon that doesn't exist, it's going to be null. So what we want to do is we want to check if trainer, and that's kind of JavaScript shorthand. In a lot of languages, this won't work. You'd have to do something like this. But for our purposes, we can simply do if trainer, and then inside that we'll also check if Pokemon. Let's put else blocks after both of those, because we're going to need them. Okay, so if both Pokemon and trainer are, if we found something for that, we're going to then create a Pokemon trainer record. So in our database in Pokemon trainers, there's this table, and this is what we create records here whenever we catch Pokemon. So we'll see here a Pokemon ID of 4, trainer ID of 2. Trainer ID will be null because we're not making a trade with anyone. We're just catching that Pokemon. Nickname will be Charmy. Seen will be 1 because, you know, if we caught it, we've seen it, and we caught it, so that's also going to be 1. 1 means true, 0 means false, and then it'll have a created and modified date for those. So we're going to create a new Pokemon trainer record, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to say await models Pokemon trainer create. In SQL, it's called insert. In SQLize, they call it create. And then we're just going to do Pokemon ID. So we can do this. So we're setting the Pokemon ID to Pokemon ID, but we're just going to use a JavaScript shorthand. So we're going to remove this since they're the same. And that works. Do the same with trainer ID. Nickname, if nickname's null, that's fine. And then seen is, we're going to hard code that to true, caught is true. And like I said, in our database, this will get translated to 1. Same here. If it was false, it'd be a 0. And the use case for having it seen be true and copy false is in Pokemon, sometimes you battle a Pokemon, but you don't actually catch it. So you can log that in your Pokedex. You've seen that Pokemon, but you didn't catch it. And then we'll worry about these else blocks in a second. At the end here, we'll return res.send. And we'll do trainer.name. Oh, sorry. That needs a $sign. So this is a template string. We're just going to tell the user that, the trainer, whatever their name is, Gary caught Charmander. Before we do this, though, I'm just going to make sure we're sending them JSON. It's always good to make sure your response objects are somewhat standardized. So we're going to send a JSON object with a message of trainer name caught Pokemon.name. And we'll put an exclamation mark, make it a little more fun. And yeah, that's all there is to that. We just need to handle these cases where trainer or Pokemon are not found in the database. So what we'll do just here under the else statement, after checking if Pokemon is null, we'll do return. We're going to return an error, and the status is going to be 400. Now that means not found. So it's appropriate here, and we'll send a message of let's do Pokemon, and then we'll do the Pokemon ID, whatever ID they sent us, not found. Then we can just copy this and paste it in this else block, and we'll just replace Pokemon with trainer, and that will give us the right error message. One more thing we want to do, whenever you execute a transaction on the database, so inserting a record, or updating a record, or deleting a record, there is room for error. So we're going to wrap this in a try catch block. And that just means we're going to try this block of code. And if it fails, if there's an error, we're going to catch that error. Our code's not going to break. We're going to do something instead. So in this case, if there's an error, we're going to send a status of 500, which basically means something happened. We don't know exactly what, something happened, and here's an error. We're going to send this error object so that the client can kind of debug it a little further. 500, just for your information, means internal error. It's probably one of the most generic statuses out there, but it's useful. So we're going to say, we'll say unable to catch Pokemon, or let's say there was a problem catching the Pokemon, and then we'll put the error message in here, or the error object, I should say, and that'll hopefully help them debug a little bit more. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. So we already built our Postman request here. So I think what you want to do is just make sure you save this file and then restart your API. Okay, it looks like we have a problem here. Okay, yeah, this is important. So await, I kind of explained this in the last video, or 2 videos ago, but await can only be used in an async function. So all we have to do is add the word async to the front of that. And maybe you already did that. Okay, now go ahead, start your API, hit send. And there it is, Gary Oak caught Charmander. Now, if we did this correctly, if we go into the database, into the Pokemon trainers table, just refresh, and there we see that new record, Pokemon ID 4 was caught by trainer 2, given a nickname of Charmy, was seen and caught, and here's the the created date and the modified date. So it was this is when they caught it. And yeah, that's all there is to that. In the next video, we will add an endpoint for releasing Pokemon, because that's something you can do in the game as well.